All right, we are live. Go ahead, Frank.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Preserving Memory and Promoting Truth program, a program about the Holocaust, sponsored and hosted by the Iranian American Jewish Federation and ICAN, Israeli American Civic Action Network, both organizations dedicated to Jewish causes and fighting anti-Semitism. My name is Frank Ariel, and I am the chair of the Public Affairs Committee at the IAJF, and I'm honored to be one of the moderators of this event, along with Dylan Hosier, Senior Political Advisor with ICAN. Tonight, we're going to talk about state-sponsored Holocaust revision and distortion. That is, government-backed propaganda campaigns designed to deny certain historical facts about the Holocaust or otherwise distort the truth about the Holocaust. Those of us in the Persian Jewish community, and I'm sure there will be many of us here, are very familiar with the insensitivities, the insensitive and false and inflammatory rhetoric from the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran denying the Holocaust. But recently, there has also been a renewed effort in Eastern Europe, in some of the nations where the worst atrocities of the Holocaust took place, to erase the crimes of the perpetrators and to rewrite, revise history in order to turn these criminals into national heroes. Tonight, we'll explore a specific story involving Lithuania and the current government-backed campaign to cover up crimes of a Holocaust perpetrator named Jonas Norika, who ordered the murder of thousands of Jews. We have here with us Silvia Foti, the granddaughter of Jonas Norika, and Grant Gochin, whose family was murdered by Sylvia's grandfather during the Holocaust. I will go ahead and introduce Sylvia at this point. Silvia Foti is a journalist, teacher, and mother living in Chicago. She holds master's degrees in journalism, education, and creative nonfiction, and has written 2 books. She's been published in Salon.com, Chicago Tribune, Southwest Economist, and has won awards for her investigative journalism. Sylvia is the author of Nazi's Granddaughter, How I Discovered My Grandfather Was a War Criminal, a first-hand account of a journey which began as an act of family pride to write about her famous Lithuanian war hero grandfather, but ended in a terrible discovery that he was a Nazi war criminal, which is the topic of our discussion tonight. We'll also later be joined by Rabbi Wolpe of Sinai Temple, who is going to talk to us about his perspective and his various experience in this topic. I'm going to now ask my co-moderator, Dylan, to introduce our other speaker.
Thanks, Frank. Great to be with you this evening with IAJF and those of us here at ICAN, and Grant and Sylvia, good to see you as always. Grant, I'll go ahead and introduce you. Grant Arthur Gochin is an activist for the truth about Jewish history in Lithuania. He is a serial litigant against the Lithuanian government to document their official positions and expose their Holocaust distortions and other anti-Semitic actions. Grant is the author of Malice, Murder, and Manipulation, and professionally, he's a certified planner and wealth manager, certified financial planner and wealth manager in Los Angeles. Welcome, Grant.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Dylan. Hi, Sylvia.
Grant.
Hi, Grant.
Hello, Sylvia. Nice to have both of you with us. I'm going to turn to Grant. Grant, your accent is going to give it away in a second. You're South African, yes. And you live in LA, but you're as Dylan named you. You're a serial litigant, and I want to find out. I want to ask you how you ended up doing what you're doing, and basically give us some background as much as you can.
Thank you, Frank. When you say I'm a serial litigant, believe it or not, I run a large practice, and the only entity I've ever sued in my entire life is the Lithuanian government. I'm actually not litigious other than in Lithuania. So your question was, how did I become involved? And I grew up in South Africa, where 90% of the Jews of South Africa were of Lithuanian heritage. It was an absolutely intact community transplanted from Lithuania to the tip of Africa. And even today, it's an intact Lithuanian, very Zionist community. So when I was growing up, everybody had an accent, and they all had the same accent. It was it was the accent from the old country. And for most of my friends, their grandparents never spoke to them. They never told them where the accent was from or what the history was. But my grandfather did. And every time, he and I were extremely close. And every time we were together, he would tell me about the old country. And it sparked a lifetime fascination of history and politics, geographical power. And my whole childhood, I heard about the old country, how he was taken by one army to the next. He had these photographs of his family, and he would show me the photographs. And then when he was getting older, South Africans were not allowed into the Soviet Union. So he was never able to go to Lithuania for the rest of his life. And towards the end of his life, he said to me, "I'm not going to be able to go, but you will go for me. And when you go, say Kaddish. Say Kaddish for everybody that was murdered. Go to the family cemeteries. Say Kaddish for the relatives that are buried there. And look and see if you can find anybody that survived." My whole childhood, there was this emptiness that 3 of my grandparents were from the Baltics, and everybody had been murdered. And so I did go back to Lithuania. I've been very many times, and I've restored dozens of Jewish cemeteries. I've done incredible heritage preservation work.
Grant,
And one day, yeah.
I'm sorry. When you talked about your childhood, it just brought up to me memories of my childhood when I probably was 7 or 8 years old. I went into my dad's library and I opened one of his books. I didn't know it was about the Holocaust. I had no idea, never heard about the Holocaust. And I saw all these pictures of, very, very ugly pictures of dead people. And I can relate to that. I mean, that also later on finding out from my father that was the story of Holocaust, that really also affected me. But do you think that it's that connection that you had with your childhood that has made you such a vigorous fighter on this cause?
Absolutely. I absolutely adored my grandfather, and his pain was tangible. The loss was tangible. And I spent my childhood just wanting to make him whole, wanting to end his pain, to make things better for him, to give him some justice. And we can't. There's no way to give justice to the victims.
Right, and that's the pain that millions of survivors' children also experience, having heard the stories and seen the pictures. So that brings you to Lithuania and pursuing them legally. Tell us about that.
Well, so one day I was in my grandfather's village, and there's 3 killing fields. There's 3 mass death pits and 3 killing fields in my grandfather's village. And I was going from the one killing field to the other, lighting Yortzeit candle, saying Kaddish. The cemeteries were desecrated. The people took the gravestones to use as building materials. They dug up the graveyards looking to see if there were gold fillings on old skeletons.
Wow.
And I said to the academic I was with, who did the murders? Who shot them? Who brought them to the death pits? Who murdered the children? Who murdered the old people? Who did this? The academic looked at me and said, it was a man by the name of Jonas Noreka. Now, I'm going to make this very, very brief, but I looked, and Jonas Noreka was exposed as the murderer in 1984, 6 years before Lithuania achieved independence. And he was only named as one of the national heroes in 1997, 7 years after they achieved independence. So there was no deniability. They knew who he was and what he did. But murdering Jews is not an impediment in Lithuania to being honored.
Right.
And so I didn't understand that at that point in time. It was the concept that you could take a genocidal murderer and consider this as your national hero, as the best that your nation has to show the world. It never entered my mind. So I thought I just needed to tell the government, you've made a mistake. Let's rectify it. It was only when I realized they hadn't made a mistake. It hadn't been inadvertent. They were deliberately rewriting history that I began to litigate. And I've had approximately 20 legal actions against the government, the criminal authorities. I've been through 5 different courts.
Grant, I'm going to pause you. I'm going to pause you right there because we've done a great intro. Before we get into the substance of your suits, I want to bring in Sylvia. If that's okay.
How they came together.
Exactly. So Sylvia, you're a teacher today. You're a teacher in Chicago. You're now the author of a fantastic book, The Nazi's Granddaughter, that just was released almost exactly a month ago. Can you, first of all, before we get into your history, can you tell us a little bit about how that experience has been over the last month with the book?
It's been surreal, lots of interviews, lots of attention. Even in Lithuania, the Genocide Center, the great arbiter of history, which has been defending my grandfather, the head of the center has been dismissed as of Thursday. So I think Lithuania's history is in upheaval.
Yeah. We'll get to that current political crisis here later in the broadcast. But congratulations on the book. It's fantastic. I know it's had a great impact on our community. But tell us a little bit about yourself. You grew up in Chicago in a Lithuanian community. Tell us a little bit about that and your initial exploration of your heritage.
Yeah, I grew up in Marquette Park, a very insular Lithuanian community. I went to kindergarten only speaking Lithuanian, which was a point of pride for my mother. By the time I got old enough, I was hearing lots of stories about my grandfather, about what a wonderful hero he was during World War II, and how he fought for the country's freedom against the terrible communists. And I heard how he died in a KGB prison after being tortured for 1 year at the age of 36. I heard how he was in a Nazi concentration camp for 2 years because he saved Jews. I heard that he led a rebellion against the Soviets, not once, but twice, in 1941 and then again in 1945 with the 2 invasions. So he was, this magnificent hero. He was a writer. One of the reasons I became a journalist was because of my grandfather. I was so inspired by him. So he has had a profound impact on me. And my mom was always working on the story about her father. So I grew up, she's constantly collecting material on him. All these bookshelves behind me came from her archives. And in the year 2000, she was only 60 years old, but she got very, very sick. And she was on the verge of death and called me to her bedside and said, "Sylvia, you have to write the book." And that is how I got involved in this whole story. I was never going to do this. This was my mom's project. She was going to do it. And
Right.
she had run out of time, and it was so important to her that she couldn't just leave it undone. And I was a journalist at the time, so she just basically asked me to do it. When your mom's dying and asks you to do it, you just have one answer. So that's how I got involved. And I thought I was just going to write a very quiet story about an unknown Lithuanian who was a hero, and maybe a few people in Lithuanian community would appreciate it. And I thought that was all it was going to be.
Right. Got it.
Well, I just want to war hero, and then it turned out to be something else.
Yes, he turned out to be a Nazi collaborator and an architect of the genocide in Lithuania.
So I do want to give a quick technical note here. If you're watching and you have questions, you can leave comments on Facebook and YouTube. We will see them and we can bring them up on screen. We have Rabbi Wolpe. I see you're here a little early. We're going to finish this segment and we'll bring you up in just a few minutes here. We'll say hello real quick. You say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Right.
Hello, Rabbi.
It's good to see you. We'll give you.
I'm happy to listen.
Yeah, we'll give you a few minutes in the green room. You can learn, and we'll bring it back up on stage.
Good.
Thanks, Rabbi. So go ahead, Frank.
I wanted to know. So Sylvia, you're growing up with this image of a war hero grandfather, and then was it in the year 2000 that you started hearing rumors about, hey, this may not be the truth? This is that correct?
Yeah, my mom asked to be buried in Lithuania. And there's a very interesting episode with my grandmother that happened too. My grandmother survived my mother 5 months. And then my grandmother was on her deathbed and she calls me over and she says, Sylvia, how's the book going? And I said, don't worry what you did, grandmother. Don't worry what you did. It's fine. I'm going to get it done. I'm 38 years old. I'm young. I'm a journalist, and I'm thinking I'm giving her words of comfort. And she says, don't write the book. And I said, what? And she said, just let history lie. There's no need to dig around. And I said, Muchita, I have to write the book. Mom asked me to do this on her deathbed. There's no way I'm not going to do this. I have to do it. And she did not like my answer. And she rolled over and basically gave me her back. And that was the end of the conversation that day. And the next time I saw her, she was in a coma and then had died.
So she had a feeling that the truth was going to be discovered. When you started hearing these rumors and so forth, what did you do to verify and find out if they're true or not?
Well, it took me a long time. The first time I heard it was in the school named after him. The director had told me there, right after my mother's death, right after my grandmother's death, that he said to me, your grandfather was accused of killing Jews. And I almost fainted on the spot because that was the first time I had heard that. Yeah. And his response is what every Lithuanian says, is that it's not true. It's just communist propaganda. So let's move on. So that's kind of what I did for about almost 10 years. When I came back to Chicago, I also went into the state of denial of what my grandfather did, believing it's just communist propaganda. But I came across several documents in my own mother's archives, and then I had traveled to Lithuania and found, of course, much more. And then when I met Grant, everything exploded, and he had like other parts of the story too. And when we put both of the parts of the story together, there's just no question.
How did you guys come together? What brought you guys together?
So let's explore that real quick, because I think this is a perfect transition point. So Sylvia, you were getting closer to beginning the process of writing your book. And you were about to create your, do the things that you need to do to get that done. Grant, you were already in the process of your serial litigation. So yes. touch on that very quickly, and then we'll toss it to Sylvia about how she discovered you, and then how you guys met. But give us real quick. How did you tell us about your litigation?
So I found out about Noreka in about 2010, and I started researching. It wasn't easy to research. I started researching and approaching members of the Lithuanian government and saying, "You've made a mistake. You've made a mistake." And then in 2015, I was involved in a petition to the government to take down the main monument. And the government response was, it was agents of the East, the Kremlin agents, Jews, and other stupid people had arranged this petition. Now, it was signed by their own member of the European Parliament. It was signed by the chairman of the main university. It was the intelligentsia of the country that the government then labeled as enemies of the state. And it became increasingly clear that whatever evidence I'd shown them was going to be insufficient. So I hired a PhD researcher and a second researcher to go through the archives as thoroughly as possible to find anything that wasn't already known. And I was at that point already suing the government of Lithuania. Now, I spent tens of thousands of hours researching, and I discovered an article written many decades ago by the granddaughter of the murderer, Silvia Foti, lauding her grandfather, what a national hero he was, and what a saint. And it was like, it was disgusting. It was absolutely disgusting. I wanted, it was so distasteful.
So I'm gonna jump in if that's okay. Now,
Yes.
so you've made this discovery, Sylvia. You're getting ready to proceed with the book, and you have to get through certain things. So go ahead and share that part of the story.
So it's 2018. I finally finished writing the book, and I'm ready to, find an agent, a literary agent. And, one thing authors get shocked into discovering is that they have to build an author platform. It's not enough to just write the book anymore. So first thing I did was create a website. And within days of creating this website, this researcher with a PhD from Lithuania contacts me and says, and he introduces himself, and he says he's working for a man by the name of Grant Gochin, who is conducting a lawsuit against the Genocide Center of Lithuania about my grandfather. And I almost fell off my chair when I read that, because I thought, I just couldn't believe that this was happening. And then he says, oh, and you should meet Grant. And I thought, oh my gosh, and I was really scared to meet Grant because, my grandfather killed 100 of his relatives. He's not going to want to talk to me, and I'm scared to talk to him. What is he going to say to me? And so it took me 6 weeks to talk myself into sending just an email to Grant. And I finally talked myself into it by saying, I've spent 18 years now on this book, and who did I write this book for if it's not for someone like Grant? So that's how I finally convinced myself to. And so, my hands are shaking, and I'm trying to write a letter to Grant, and I'm introducing myself. And I said, and I think, we should probably talk on the phone when you're ready. So then Grant gets the email.
So Grant, you get the email. You see the email come in, and what do you do?
So I actually had a physical response to this email. I'm sitting in this chair that I'm sitting in now. My computer's in front of me. The email pops up, and it says, "Hello, Mr. Gochin. My name is Silvia Foti. I assume you know who I am." And I knew exactly who she is. And she said, I think we should have a conversation. So I started shaking. I was sweating. My heart was beating. And I said, okay, let's talk later. I needed time to calm down. And so she gets on the phone. Now, make no mistake, Noreka is just one of very many mass murderers that Lithuania has converted into national heroes. This is not an isolated incident in that country. And by this time, I filed so many lawsuits. I've been in contact with so many members of the government. I've had so much hate mail. The only experience I've had has been negative. So Sylvia, so I don't know who dialed who. It was Sylvia or myself dialed, and she said, "I've read all of your research because I made everything public, and I'm really suspicious." And I said, "Yes." So she said, "You've made one very big error." I said, "What?" She says, "You've missed approximately 10,000 of my grandfather's victims."
Wow.
And with that, I mean, the suspicion was gone. Then she said to me, "Would you like to read my manuscript?" And this was her manuscript, the book that she's just done. And so I said, "Yes." I mean, I've been involved with Lithuania for 30 years already. I'm familiar with the history. So, and I'm used to total historical fraud from that country. So I said, "Yes, I would like to read your manuscript." She emailed it to me, and I read it that night. I didn't get up until I finished it. And that's actually a common response that I've heard from people that since it's been released, that have read it, that it's a compelling manuscript. And by the time I finished, all suspicion was gone. I mean, it was, she just laid it out. She peeled the onion back layer by layer. And it's not that the government of Lithuania has done this cleverly. Their dishonesty has been really crude.
So Grant, we're gonna let's get to that. Let's get to that. And we're at the bottom of the hour. I'd
Yes.
like to bring in Rabbi Wolpe to continue the conversation.
Okay.
So let's bring in a rabbi. Hello, Rabbi.
Hi.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So before we'll have a nice introduction for you and everything, but Rabbi, just hearing the story, I don't know if you want to share some initial thoughts.
Sure. My initial, first of all, it's a remarkable story, and both are heroic. But when I hear Grant's accent, it occurs to me, a lot of Lithuanian Jews went to South Africa, and I know this because my family, Wolpe, is from Lithuania. Wolpe was a city right outside Vilna that was then incorporated in Vilna. That's where I got my name. And in fact, if you go online, you can still see the wooden synagogue of Wolpe, which was apparently famous in its time. It's long since burned down during the war. So this story very much hits home, and it's extraordinarily both dramatic and tragic, as so much of the history of the Jewish people, but also especially of World War II is. And I feel grateful to both of your guests that they've done the work that they've done, difficult in different ways.
Right, thank you, Rabbi. So next, I really appreciate that perspective. Next up, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the political situation and what is happening now, because we've gotten to the point in the story where Grant and Sylvia have connected, and that's a perfect transition to talk about the current situation in Lithuania, what's going on. And Rabbi, how leaders like you and your congregation can get involved and hoping to affect change. But before we get there, Frank, do you want to go ahead for our viewers and introduce Rabbi?
Sure. Welcome, Rabbi. Obviously, Rabbi Wolpe needs no introduction, but if I could do it in a minute or two, he's named one of the 500 most influential people in Los Angeles in 2016 and again in 2017. Rabbi, if I have any of it wrong, please correct me.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. He's been named as most influential rabbi in America by Newsweek and one of the 50 most influential Jews in the world by the Jerusalem Post. Rabbi Wolpe is the Max Webb Senior Rabbi of Sinai Temple. He's previously taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York, the American Jewish University in Los Angeles, Hunter College, and UCLA. He's a columnist for Time. He's been published and profiled in the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, on and on, the Huffington Post, and the New York Jewish Week. Rabbi Wolpe has been featured on the Today Show, Face the Nation, ABC This Morning, and CBS This Morning. In addition, Rabbi Wolpe has appeared prominently in series on PBS, Arts and Entertainment, History Channel, and the Discovery Channel. Rabbi Wolpe is the author of 8 books, including the national bestseller, Making Loss Matter, Creating Meaning in Difficult Times. His new book is titled David, The Divided Heart. It was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Awards and has been optioned for a movie by Warner Brothers. What's being optioned, Rabbi? I've never heard of that phrase.
That's when they buy the rights to your book and decide if they want to make a movie and eventually decide not to.
Okay.
That's what optioned is.
Welcome to Hollywood.
God willing, Sylvia's book will have a better thing. I mean, it just exists there forever and ever, and maybe one day, who knows? But
so if I might just to kind of lead us in here, you know, I work in the political sector. I spent 10 years working for the Israeli government at the consulate here in Los Angeles. Now, you know, I'm working with this great organization, ICAN, to empower Israelis living in America, and working with Grant and Sylvia on their issue, and helping to educate members of Congress. And I have to say, if I can take one or 2 minutes, you know, I've known Grant for a long time through the diplomatic corps in Los Angeles. Grant is also an honorary consul. And I saw he was always talking about Lithuania. I never understood what he was talking about. I never understood the story. I never understood anything that, and frankly, I thought he was a little crazy.
You and a lot of other people.
So, and it wasn't until Poland in 2018 passed their law, which created some criminal penalties about Holocaust history and making certain claims about Polish involvement in the Holocaust, which to me seemed, I couldn't believe that a European country would do this. It seemed unbelievable. And Grant eventually came back to me and said, you know, if that made you angry, Lithuania is looking to do the same thing. And as a political person, I saw it as a row of dominoes that were one by one starting to be tipped over. And eventually we would get to a situation when, you know, Holocaust survivors are dying, eyewitnesses are dying, and governments in Europe begin rewriting and revising their Holocaust history. So we committed to educating elected officials. We've gone to the city of LA, city of Beverly Hills, city of even West Hollywood, and others, and all of them have passed resolutions condemning Lithuania. We're working now to do the same in the state of California. And in Congress, by the way, and you know, we're coming up on Yom Hashoah. This broadcast tonight is in honor of Yom Hashoah, and we're hoping that they will pass a resolution also recognizing Holocaust distortion, revisionism, and denial perpetuated by governments. Rabbi, you lead a prominent and influential congregation. What is your perspective on this, and how can the grassroots get involved, and what's the best way that we can work here in America to try to educate our elected officials so that we don't have more of these dominoes tipping over in Europe?
Well, I want to say 2 things about the denial. The first is, of course, that a large percentage of my congregation is Iranian, and they are sort of right now the princes of Holocaust denial in
Yes.
Iran. And so part of it is that the world has to separate whatever its politics are from historical truth. But that's a very difficult thing to do in every country. And the reason in particular, I think in Eastern Europe and places like Poland or Lithuania, that it is so hard, and this is important for people to keep in mind, is if you can claim status as a victim, then you can believe that you've never been a victimizer. And Poland was a victim, but it was also a victimizer. I mean, there were 3 million Jews in Poland before the war. And so it's really important, I think, to acknowledge the fact that, yes, Eastern Europe did suffer, but that has nothing to do with the fate of Jews, not only during the war, but even after the war. The stories of Jews who went back home after the war, and the anti-Semitism was savage afterwards. And so the best way, I think, as we all know, is to educate elected officials as deeply as we can, and all across the board, from the far left to the far right. It's irrelevant where you are on the political spectrum in terms of the reality that this is the greatest targeted genocide in human history, where one people was targeted, would have been all over the world had the Nazis been victorious. And to deny it is, I can't imagine anyone's principles that would not be violated by a denial of Holocaust. They have to actually, they have to distort so much in order to be able to say, well, we didn't do it. That I think educational efforts are both indispensable and have to be unremitting, because the capacity, as I say, for people to deny what they did, what their parents did, what their grandparents did, is really boundless. And Sylvia Forti's book is a shining example of the courage that it takes. The fact that there are so few accounts like this tells you that it's not easy to say my father or grandfather was a mass murderer. I mean, who would want to say that? So it's not. However, having said that, I think it's also very important to recognize how many allies we have in this effort, because sometimes we are inclined only to point to the people who don't help, but there are lots of people who do, and you have to make common cause with those who are honest, and those who are courageous, and those who are true.
Rabbi, a question I have perhaps for you and the other panelists is, why do you think they're trying so hard to revise history? I mean, the evidence is obviously there. What is it in for the government of Lithuania to be denying the facts? Is it because they don't want to pay reparations to these victims? Are they really in denial? Do they really think they had nothing to do with it? Is it really innocent, or a very guilty type of revision of history?
I could start the conversation. One big problem is that Lithuania was occupied by the Soviet Union for 45 years. And during that occupation, and this is the problem with the other Eastern European countries, it could not delve into its own history. It could not resurrect any heroes. So it was just basically what the Soviets told them to do. It was a totalitarian state. And they had no freedoms to do any sort of analysis of themselves and their history. So that was a big part of it. It was like a deep freeze over their own history. The other part is the Soviets kept calling the Jews Soviet citizens. So they counted the Jews' death as just Soviet citizen deaths. So it's like they didn't even differentiate that it was a Holocaust. They just called it, Lithuanians killing Soviet citizens, and that's it. Like as part of the war against the communism. So on top of that, you have just the regular, not regular, but the denial of Lithuanians not wanting to face the fact that they could be this horrible and this cruel. What like Rabbi Walpe was saying was that the idea that they were victims of the Nazis and the communists. I mean, it's like having two abusive parents, the Nazis on one side and the communists on the other side. And this is not a healthy way to grow up, And so even though they're a democracy now for the past 30 years, they are still struggling to find themselves. They're having a hard time. They're having a hard time dealing. It's traumatic. It was very traumatic for me to discover what my grandfather did. And for 10 years, I didn't want to face it. So I get Lithuanians not wanting to face it, just on a human psychological level, just that. Then you add in all the politics involved. So that's what I would say.
Part of it is shame and guilt. The rest of it is politics. I was going to ask Grant, when you reach these politicians with all this evidence, solid evidence that you've gathered from Sylvia and yourself, and you've filed many lawsuits, how can they reject your lawsuit? Your lawsuits have been dismissed for the most part. All of them have been dismissed.
Yes, but they've been dismissed. They've been dismissed based on technicalities. Okay, no outside body has examined any of the facts of the case. The Lithuanian legal system is not an independent system, and the judiciary is not an independent judiciary. Let's leave it at that. So, but let's go back a little bit to what Sylvia was saying. When a country has to nation build, there's two ways of nation building. You find a common enemy, which they have in Russia, and you find common heroes. So the murder rate in Lithuania was higher than any other country in Europe. The murder rate was 96.4%. So it was a complete annihilation. So they didn't expect anybody to come back. They certainly didn't expect somebody like myself that would say, no, you're not going to lie. So instead of saying, yes, we were victimizers, they inverted history and made the murderers into their heroes. And they thought that they would just be able to rewrite history, show themselves exclusively as victims, and nobody would ever be the wiser. Unfortunately, when shown the evidence, when shown the documents, the dishonesty has been crude. And they've just come back with absurd defenses. There could have been two people with the same name. We don't know who signed the document. You know, that testimony, we just dismissing it as unreliable. They dismissed all of Sylvia's 20 years of research on the basis she disagreed with her mother, therefore she's unreliable, therefore they wouldn't even look at her research.
Right.
I had a PhD doing my research. They said he was a dilettante. So, but then they had a geologist construct a false report that Noreika was saving Jews, and that is now enforced by rule of law in Lithuania. And when I say it's enforced with rule of law in Lithuania, they've actually threatened me with criminal and constitutional charges for submitting a historical study. So this is enforced by rule of law.
This is in Lithuania. So
Correct.
you're getting all this rejection and backlash in Lithuania, and your current lawsuit is in front of the world body now, right?
Correct. I've been through 5 different courts in Lithuania. I appealed for criminal prosecution of the deniers for Holocaust denial, which is against the law. I've appealed to the Ombudsman of the Parliament, to more government departments than is imaginable, and I'm now out of the Lithuanian legal system, and the case is pending in front of the European Court of Human Rights.
Do you think that the European Union would have any kind of desire to want to hand them justice that you haven't been able to find in Lithuania?
Well, that depends. If the judges are all from Eastern Europe that first receive the case, they're going to say, no, it's not a case that they want to hear. If the judges that receive the case initially are from Western Europe, I think this is a case that Europe would very much want to hear, because inversion of history, fake news has become predominant.
So, Frank, one of the things I want to mention is, you're the chair at the Iranian American Jewish Federation. You're the chair of the Public Affairs Committee. And you guys do phenomenal work over the years. And I do want to acknowledge that and highlight that. And also, I want to mention Susan Azizadeh, the president of IAJF, a great friend of our community and a great leader. We're in a situation now where Grant and Sylvia's story is having real impact on the ground in Lithuania. As Sylvia mentioned earlier, the director of the Genocide Center was forced by Parliament to, just last week, Sylvia, I think it was, right? It was just last week. He was forced to resign.
Hold
Sorry, go ahead.
Let me interrupt you 1 second. He was forced out for incompetence. He was not forced out for Holocaust revisionism. So they are sticking by their Holocaust revisionism and distortion. He was forced out because he spoke to Tata TV and made the most that all the problems of Lithuania are caused by gay people and liberalism is making the youth sick. He was forced out for that, not for Holocaust revisionism.
Sure, got it. But also prior to that, there were several historians who quit. There were academics from Lithuania who refused to work with this Genocide Center. And we should say that the Genocide Center is an agency of the government of Lithuania. This isn't an independent body. So there are some seismic activity here happening under the Genocide Center. Grant, you've been at this for a while. What's your current take on this activity that's happening right now? It's happening in real time. And what can leaders like Frank and Susan and Rabbi Wolpe do to help move this in the right direction? In your mind?
In my mind, look, it is a fight between the liberal, decent youth who are really, actually really nice people, and this old guard that if they could do it again, I believe that they would want to. And it's a generational civilization fight. Unfortunately, the Lithuanian foreign diplomats look us straight in the eye and dissemble, make excuses, distract, evade. American international leaders need to be specific with Lithuanian government officials. When will these monuments be removed?
When you say monuments, I don't think we touched on that in this broadcast. Touch on that for a second. You mentioned earlier there's many Holocaust perpetrators who have been converted now into national heroes. They've been given honors. Monuments have been built to them. Schools have been named after them. They're celebrated in the nation. One of the things that strikes me is we here in this country just last year, and again, I'm a political guy, so I look at Congress and this kind of legislation. We passed the Never Again Education Act with wide support in Congress last year. We are so focused on Holocaust education in this country now, especially with rising anti-Semitism that we're trying to combat. And in using the Holocaust, it's humanity's greatest crime. And, when we say never again, it's a promise that we have to work to keep.
Dylan, can I say something about that? Though one of the reasons that we do that is because we have clean hands, or at least we think we do. Now, we don't have perfectly clean hands. God knows. I mean, just today, Ronan Bergman in the New York Times had a startling report about how the CIA protected Fritz Huber, who was as dastardly and evil a Nazi war criminal as could be, because they used him as a spy in the Cold War. Now, we don't have perfectly clean hands, but compared to countries in Eastern Europe, we do. And so it is easier for us to face our own past. But the other thing that is different about America and is, I think, really important is America has two oceans at its side. Lithuania is bordered by Latvia and Belarus and Poland, other countries that if they're not willing to come clean, and Lithuania does, so Lithuania becomes then the one country among all these countries that did bad things because all the other countries are saying we didn't. And so I think it has to be a broader effort, because unless you get a shift among several countries, since they're nestled together, you probably are not going to get a single country that is willing to face up to its past.
I think that's an important observation. Go ahead, Grant.
Latvia and Estonia have done a far better job.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. Why, Grant? Why do you think that they have?
Latvia had cleaner hands, as you said. When the Nazis came, the Lithuanians started murdering Jews before the Nazis arrived. The Nazis reported that in Latvia they found it difficult to get cooperation from the locals, and Estonia was outside of the pale of the settlement, so there were very few Jews there, so they were able to address it and move on. If a country like Lithuania or Ukraine doesn't address it and tell the truth, they're going to be stuck in this forever. And what's happened, and Dylan, may I just give one example, please? Okay, Rabbi, you're aware of the concentration camp Majdanek. The leader of the concentration camp, the Majdanek concentration camp, was a man by the name of Baltusas. The Lithuanian government's position on Baltusas was he served outside of the camp, so he didn't know what was happening inside the camp. Therefore, and if you recall, it was just barbed wire. The villagers were complaining about the smell, and they say, well, he didn't know what was happening inside the camp. And these are the kind of defenses that they put up. So trying to get from that kind of deception to even beginning to scratch the surface of telling the truth on somebody like Sylvia's grandfather, where we have approximately 100 documents with his signature on it. I mean, you talk about two oceans in the United States. We're 17 oceans away from truth in Lithuania. And I have no idea how they even broach this, because they veered so far off into revisionism.
Right. Grant, we don't have a lot of time. Before we get to the questions, I was thinking that it's very interesting that we're having this program tonight, because myself and Mrs. Aziza, the president of IAJF, and a few of our members are actually meeting tomorrow with through Zoom with Congressman Ted Lieu, who's on the congressional task force to fight anti-Semitism. And these are some of the issues that we intend to discuss with him, anti-Semitism in the United States. And so I wanted to ask the three of you, what do you think? What message would you want us to deliver to Congressman Ted Lieu as far as not only domestic anti-Semitism, but more so anti-Semitism that is going on, this kind of revisionism in European countries? Do you think United States Congress can do anything? What power, influence can we exert?
Frank, please let me answer. Ask him to read this. What this is, it's Sylvia's memoir. It's our story. But what this is a manual on how to do a genocide and to lie about it and claim innocence afterwards. If there was a mass murder in Tigray in Ethiopia a couple of days ago by government troops. If European countries are still able to deny the facts of 80 years ago, how are we going to stop genocides of the Uyghurs and in Tigray now? Europe says that they're the most civilized continent that are leading the way, but we are still in full fraud about a genocide that took place 80 years ago. We have to start somewhere. And what we've done with all of these cases is we've made it crystal clear how dishonest they've been. If we don't start holding foreign powers to account for murdering their own citizens, this will never, ever stop. If we are going to say never again, this is the starting point of never again. Here's 100 documents. Here's incontrovertible proof. Tell the truth. That's basic never again. We don't have a choice. Otherwise, it's going to continue forever. So please ask the congressman to step in, to read this book, to understand how this is done, and it's done today. I mean, George Orwell wrote about it, and now Silvia Foti's written about it, and it's the same thing. Please ask him to get involved.
As we speak, one of our members just typed in that we'll send a copy of the book over.
Thank you.
Congressman, I wanted to ask Rabbi Wolpe a question, and I wanted to know, Rabbi, if you think that is it appropriate for members of the pulpit, rabbis like yourself, who have such influence and clout, to speak up on issues like these publicly?
I think it's not. I don't think it's appropriate. I think it's indispensable. I think we have to, and as Grant just said, not solely about the Holocaust. I think we have to speak up. The Uyghurs are. I just signed a rabbinic letter actually about the Uyghurs, and I did it in part because, not obviously as a human being, and a mass murder is a mass murder. But I also did it because, as you said, you can't say, I'm going to recognize this genocide, but that one I'm going to deny. You have to be consistent. It's one of the reasons, I mean, Elie Wiesel was always on the forefront of such causes, because he really believed if you want the world to acknowledge the Holocaust, you can't turn around and say that never again only means never again in 1944 in Germany. It has to mean never again for all of these causes. And what I would say to the congressman is, you will lose every cause you really care about if you lose this one, because once a country can deny something that massive and that overwhelming, so of course in 20 years no one will remember the Uyghurs. That's sort of elementary. If you get away with a lie that big, then people will know that it can be gotten away with. And as Elie Shmerny says, maybe the congressman should meet our two guests.
And can I tell the congressman Rabbi Wolpe said, if you,
exactly, you can certainly tell him that.
If you lose this one,
you can certainly tell him that. Tell him he has to read this book.
Certainly. Anything else we want to touch on? We have 2.5 minutes from anyone on the.
Well, I do want to say, just as a closing thought, and then I would love to hear what Ms. Foti has to say as a closing thought too, that this is not only a political task, it's a spiritual task and a sacred task. It's what it means to be human.
Yes.
Is to acknowledge the suffering and the murder of other human beings. And if people close to you did it, that doesn't absolve you from acknowledging it.
Yeah, I mean, all I would add is when I learned of this massive cover-up of what my grandfather did during the Holocaust, I was offended personally, but you don't need to be Catholic, Lithuanian, or Jewish to join in this cause. You just need to be human. This is a crime against humanity. And I've long held the belief that the truth must persevere. There were 220,000 Jews murdered in Lithuania, 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. So for all the past and future victims of genocide, I just think we need to make the truth known.
Grant?
I don't think there's anything to add. I mean, we can't give justice to our murdered families. The only thing we can do is give them the truth. And when the murderers are hailed as national heroes, and children are taught in a school named for somebody like Noreka, Frank, imagine sending your child to Hitler High School. I mean, it's inconceivable. But in Lithuania, they do send their children to Noreka School. If if we want these atrocities to possibly end, we have to tell the truth about them.
Yeah. And at this point, I want to also acknowledge Dylan. I know that Dylan is doing a lot of good work in other states. He's currently fighting, working with the Nevada legislature to. You want to tell us about that yourself?
Yeah. Actually, so I'll just as a closing thought, there are great Holocaust education bills happening in Nevada, here in California, actually as well, where we all are. SB 693, led by our own senator in Malibu, Henry Stern. So we should all pay attention to that. It's a phenomenal piece of legislation that will strengthen Holocaust education in California. And we also have a piece of legislation we're working on in Massachusetts. So there's a lot of good work going on this issue, and we will continue to educate elected leaders. We have periodic sessions with many senators and members of the House. I do want to say thank you to you, Frank, and I have a note here from Susan. She says, thank you for shedding the light on truth. Susan, thank you so much for your leadership. I know you're watching.
She's at the forefront of it all herself.
She is. She really is. She's a real hero. She's a hero of mine, and Frank, you are too. And I thank you and the IAJF for being phenomenal partners.
Bravo.
And Rabbi, I'm a big fan of yours. That goes without saying.
Absolutely.
I'm delighted and proud to be here. Really, it was a wonderful and illuminating discussion, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Rabbi, I thought that being recognized as one of 500 worldwide was the disservice to you. I would make that list into 5 people, and I'd say you're maybe number 1 or number 2. Anyone who's heard you speak, you're amazing.
Thank you, Frank.
Hat off to you, sir.
All right, so I want to thank you all again, and for those of you viewing, thank you for watching. Please take this message forward with your leaders in your community and your elected leaders, and remember the victims of the Shoah, this Yom Hashoah as it begins. And thank you all for joining us here tonight.
Thank you.
Everyone.
All right, bye-bye.